Denmark, 1944. A German patrol officer is walking down a quiet street in Copenhagen. He stops to light a cigarette. He is confident, armed, and the occupier. Suddenly, a figure steps out from the shadows just 5 feet away. The German reaches for his rifle, but he is too late. There is no loud bang, no muzzle flash. There is no scream, just a strange, muffled click like a twig snapping in the distance. The officer falls dead before his body even hits the pavement. If anyone had looked out their window, they wouldn't have seen a pistol. They would have seen a man holding what looked like a bicycle pump. This was not a normal assassination. The weapon used wasn't a standard revolver or a machine gun. It was the quietest firearm ever created in military history. A weapon so silent that the person standing next to the victim often didn't hear the shot. It was ugly. It was slow. It was crude. But for the Nazis occupying Europe, it was a ghost. This is the story of the Welrod, the British weapon that whispered death, and the secret reason why the United States Army fell in love with it. To understand why this ugly metal tube exists, we have to go back to 1942. Europe had fallen, the British Army had been pushed off the continent, conventional warfare was failing. Britain needed a new way to fight. They needed the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. Their mission was simple but brutal: set Europe ablaze. But there was a problem. Resistance fighters and spies were operating deep behind enemy lines. If they needed to eliminate a German sentry, a Gestapo officer, or a guard dog, they had very few options. They could use a knife or a garrote wire, but that required getting dangerously close. They could use a standard pistol, but a gunshot in a quiet city is like a thunderclap. One shot and the entire German garrison would be alerted. The British tried attaching silencers to existing guns, like the Sten gun or the Colt 1911, but they were heavy, long, and notoriously unreliable. Worse, the mechanical clanking of the metal slide moving back and forth was still loud enough to be heard at night. The SOE didn't need a soldier's gun. They needed a murderer's tool. They needed a weapon that prioritized silence over everything else, even range, even reload speed. The solution came from a secret research facility known as Station 9, located at a mansion called the Frythe in Hertfordshire. This was the playground of mad scientists and eccentric engineers, and their answer to the problem was unconventional. They decided to stop trying to silence a gun. Instead, they built a silencer and put a gun inside it. Enter the Welrod. Specifically, the Model 1. At first glance, it doesn't look like a weapon. It looks like a piece of industrial scrap metal. A tube, about 12 inches long, with a rough rubber grip. It had no trigger guard. It had no safety switch. It barely had sights. But this strange design was intentional. It was designed to be deniable. If a resistance fighter was stopped at a checkpoint with the weapon disassembled, he could claim the tube was a bicycle pump or a part of a car engine. But the real magic was inside the tube. Standard silencers use metal baffles to slow down the gas expanding behind a bullet. The Welrod went a step further. It used solid rubber washers, called wipes. These weren't just open holes. The bullet actually had to punch its way through the solid rubber. The moment the bullet passed through, the rubber would snap shut behind it, trapping the hot, expanding gases inside the tube. It was a brilliant, simple, and devastatingly effective seal. The result was a pistol that produced just 73 decibels. For context, a normal conversation is about 60 decibels. A modern suppressed pistol is around 130 decibels. The Welrod was so quiet that in testing, the sound of the firing pin hitting the primer was louder than the explosion itself. But silence came at a cost. The Welrod was a bolt-action pistol. After every single shot, the user had to manually twist the knob at the back, pull it out to eject the shell, and push it back in to load the next round. It was agonizingly slow. If you missed your first shot, you were dead. This wasn't a gun for a gunfight, it was a gun for one specific moment, the execution. The rubber wipes that made it so quiet. They were destroyed by the friction. After about 15 shots, the rubber would burn out and the gun would become loud. But the designers at Station 9 didn't care. They knew that a spy wouldn't need 15 shots. They would only need one. This brings us to the most disturbing feature of the Welrod. If you look closely at the front of the gun, the muzzle isn't flat. It is concave, curved inward. This wasn't a cosmetic choice. It was an instruction manual. The Welrod was designed to be pressed directly against the victim's body. The curved nose cap was shaped to fit perfectly against a human torso or the back of a skull. This served two purposes. First, it ensured the bullet wouldn't miss. But second, and more importantly, it created a sealed vacuum between the gun and the victim. When fired this way, the sound was virtually non-existent. This level of brutal efficiency caught the attention of the Americans. In 1943, the US Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, saw the Welrod and immediately wanted it. The Americans were usually obsessed with firepower, machine guns, bazookas, tanks. But they realized that in the shadowy world of espionage, the British had created a masterpiece. The US Navy actually began manufacturing their own version of the Welrod, chambered in .32 caliber. They realized that for operations in the Pacific or occupied France, a silent elimination tool was priceless. It became one of the few pieces of British technology that the American military adopted almost without changes. It was simply too perfect to improve. So, did it work? The operational history of the Welrod is, by definition, full of holes. Successful missions left no witnesses, no reports. However, we know it was dropped by parachute to resistance fighters in Denmark, France, and Norway. We know it was used to eliminate high-ranking Nazi officers, collaborators, and sentries guarding V2 rocket sites. In one confirmed report, a British agent used a Welrod to kill 2 German guards at a border crossing. He shot the first one, and the second guard didn't even turn around because he thought his partner had just slipped on the ice. That is the terrifying power of the Welrod. But perhaps the most incredible part of this story is not what happened during World War II, but what happened after. When the war ended in 1945, most weapons were retired. The Spitfires were scrapped, the tanks were melted down, but the Welrod did not disappear. It went into the shadows. Because it was so effective, it remained classified for decades. There are persistent rumours and partial records suggesting that the Welrod was used by US Special Forces in Vietnam. Even more shockingly, it was reportedly found in the armories of the British SS during the Gulf War in 1991. Think about that. A bolt-action, rubber washer pistol designed to fight Nazis in 1942 was potentially still being used by elite special forces nearly 50 years later. Why? Because despite all our modern technology, despite our laser sights and digital warfare, nobody has ever managed to build a gun that is quite as quiet or quite as deadly as this ugly metal tube. The Welrod wasn't a weapon for heroes. It wasn't made for glory. It was a tool for a dirty, necessary job. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield isn't the biggest or the fastest. It's the one you never hear coming. This design was so perfect that it refused to die. Station 9 even built a sleeve gun variant, a simple tube hidden inside a spy's coat for invisible assassinations. Even today, modern defense companies like B&T in Switzerland produce updated versions of the Welrod using the exact same bolt-action and rubber wipe technology. It proves that sometimes 1940s engineering is still unbeatable. If you enjoyed uncovering this secret history, hit subscribe.